Hi everyone, welcome to javatechie. In our previous tutorial, we understand what is transaction and why they play a critical role in real-time project. But we didn't dive into transaction propagation or isolation level. So in this tutorial, we'll break down all the different propagation level and understand them with real-time example. Don't worry, this is not just a theory, rather we'll analyze and demonstrate each propagation type in action. Alright, so without any further delay, let's get started. Let's begin by understanding what propagation is all about. Once we have got that, next we'll discuss different type of propagation with example. Okay? So in transaction context, propagation defines how transactions are managed when a method is invoked with another transaction. For example, let me simplify this. Let's say you have two methods m1 and m2. Okay, so this is m1 and this is m2 method, and both the method implemented transaction. Now here, since you have two different method and both are implemented transaction, let's assume you are invoking m2 from m1. Now how you want your method to be executed? For example, let's say m2 transaction is failed. Then how you want your m1 transaction to continue? Whether you want to persist the record or you want to revert the record. Okay. Similarly, let's assume m1 transaction failed. Then you want to persist the record in m2 transaction or you want to roll back everything. So there are different type of permutation and combination you can play using these propagation properties. Now if you'll go to the source code and check different type of propagation properties, you'll get some clear picture about it. Let's go to our code. So if you'll go inside this propagation enum, then you can see here there are different propagation type: required, supports, mandatory, required new, not supported, never, nested. There are total 7 propagation type. So we'll discuss each and every propagation type with example, not just by theory. Okay. Even though in real time we are not using all, few of them we are using, but still it's good to know all the propagation types so that in future if you will get such kind of scenario, you will be in a state to decide, okay, this is the use case, I need to go for this not supported or mandatory or any of the propagation type. Okay, so let's begin with the first one, that is required. Let's go to our order processing service. Then first let me keep a note of what exactly this propagation required means. If I'll define propagation required, then how my transaction will behave. Okay, so you no need to remember the theory, let's understand it. Required means join an existing transaction or create a new one if not exist. Okay, so the statement is very simple. Since you have defined propagation required, first it will search for is there any active transaction. If yes, I am good, I will reuse that. If not, then I will create a new transaction. Okay, so to demonstrate different type of propagation, what we can do, if you understand here, propagation means when you will call, there are two transactions m1 and m2. If you will call one transaction inside another transaction, then only you can play with the propagation behavior, right? So let's do one thing. This save order will use the transaction here. Better I will copy here. Okay, I will copy the same statement. Just remove the isolation. We are not going to discuss about isolation in this video, that I will update in my next video. So let's copy this, paste it, Similarly, just go to the update inventory stock, then update product details. Now if you see the code, order processing service, we have a transaction. Let's say this is the transaction 1. Then from inside place an order method, we are doing another, we are just invoking another two transactions, save order and update inventory stock. Now since these are two inner transaction and this is my outer transaction, let's see how it behave. So when, let's say, there is some failure, whether it is roll back everything or it will keep the stale data or it will do the partial commit, let's validate that. Already we validate because the example what we tested in our last video, that by default consider as a required, right? But let's prove that when you are using propagation.required, it will create a single transaction and reuse it. We are sure about the behavior, how it will behave, but let's see whether really it create a single transaction or not. Similar way, we can go with different propagation. We'll check the behavior and we'll validate the transaction statement. Fine. Now what I can do, let's run the application. So it started on port 9191. Now let's see what is the happy scenario we have and what is the failure scenario we have. Okay, so we forcefully throw some error while updating the product details in inventory, saying that if product dot get price greater than 5000. Now if we'll go and check in the DV, I have added couple of more product. Okay, so if you are purchasing some product whose price is greater than 5000, then my inventory update will fail. Okay, so if that is the case, you need to purchase the product ID 1, which is laptop, or 4, which is TV. Okay, in these two case only we can find the failure scenario. If you'll try for 2 and 3, it is the happy scenario. Fine, just go to the Swagger documentation. Now what you can do here, let's try it out. Let's set order ID equal to 1 not 3, product ID want to purchase 3, quantity I want to purchase 2, total price it will be auto generated in the code, just remove it. This is what we are trying, the happy scenario. Okay, now I will execute it. We got the result. The price is, total price is 3000 because individual product price is 1500. Now if we'll check in the DV, the total count was 50. Now I'll just execute the select statement. We purchased 2, the inventory is updated correctly. Now if we'll check the order, the record is inserted. Correct? Now let's go with the failure scenario. We'll see if anything is getting failed, whether everything is rolled back or some partial commit will be happened in my transaction. So let's check that. Just change the payload, that's it. ID will be 104, product ID 1, quantity let it be 1. Now execute. We got the error. Now let's validate in our DV. Just select star from order, execute this. Did you find the record 104? No. Now similarly let's check the product. Did it update the count, laptop count? No, it is 8 only. This is expected behavior in transaction propagation label required because that is the default one which we already tried. But can you prove me that it is only create the one transaction? In update product details we are creating a transaction, in save order we are creating a transaction, and we have also one main transaction while placing an order. Will it create 3 different transactions or it will reuse the transaction if anything is active? Can we validate that? Yes, that is what you can do. Let me add a debug properties to just visualize the transaction log in application.properties file. You must need to add this because by default Spring Data JPA will use the JPA transaction manager, so you make sure to enable the debug for that. Then you can find all the transaction specific log statement. Let's run it and we'll see whether it is creating a single transaction or not. Just restart the app. So it started. Let me clear the console. Now let's go with the happy scenario first. So let it be the ID is 4. Now I cleared everything. Just send the request. You can see there are so many log statement, right? So let's read them one by one. This is the only way I can prove that okay, required is not creating the duplicate transaction, rather than it is reusing the active transaction. So just read it carefully. Creating a new transaction with name, place an order. Okay, that is my main transaction. Can you see here? When it created, place an order. That is our first transactional we have defined. Now to save the order and to update the inventory, does it create a new transaction? Let's validate that. Now participating in existing transaction. Participating in existing transaction. Can you see here? Committing a transaction on entity manager. Did you find any another create statement here? Anywhere in the log? No, right? It means if you are defining required, it will reuse the transaction if anything exists, like this participating in the existing transaction. If not, it will create a new transaction. Okay, that is clear. So we are not relying on the theory, rather we prove it with our code. That's good. So you understand when to use transaction propagation label required, when you want everything fail or everything succeeded. If you have a use case, if there is any failure, you don't want to keep the unused data, rather you want to revert everything, then go for propagation required. Okay, now let's move to the next propagation, that is required new. When can I go for required new? First, let me give you the definition of required new, then we will understand in what exact use case we can go for this propagation label. Required new, what it will do, if you will define propagation required new, then it will always create a new transaction, suspending if any existing transaction. Okay, so required new means this name itself giving the clue what it will does. I always need to create a new transaction irrespective of whether there is something running or not. If something running I found, I will suspend that till my execution completed. Okay, so when you will go for the required new, that is what the key things you need to understand. So let's say place an order. Inside that we are just persisting the order to the DB and we are updating the inventory service. And we understand both these two operation is running inside a single transaction. Correct? But we want irrespective of these two operation whether it is succeeded or failed, we want to keep an audit log so that we can track the failed order and we can proactively remind user about them, which will help my product or my system or my application to improve customer engagement. Okay, irrespective of save order or update inventory in stock, anything is going fail, that is fine, that is the valid use case, but I want to keep a audit log of those failed record so that I can reprocess them. Okay, how will you handle that situation? If let's say anything I will write, let's say I will write a method uh, audit order details, and you have some, you pass the order. Okay, now let's say this is the method I have. Now since I am writing this method inside the transaction where I have defined required, it means if save order failed or update inventory stock failed, this will also rebutted, right? But I don't want to do that. Irrespective of any success or failure, I want to keep a log of that. Then in that case, what you can do, you can define this audit order details method, saying that hey, I need required new propagation. Okay, just change it. Here you are saying, for this audit order details, I am I need a new transaction, required a new transaction. Even though save order update inventory is running on a main transaction, I don't want them. I don't want to use that transaction. Rather, I want to create a new transaction. So I need a or I required a new transaction. So in such case, when irrespective of failure or succeed on the existing transaction, you must want to execute your thing, then you can go for required new. Hope this definition is clear for you. Now let's implement the same use case. So let me quickly create one audit log entity. Just go to the entity section. Okay, this is the audit log entity. Then just quickly create the repository for audit log. Fine. Then I will just create a handler class for audit log. Nothing. I have just defined method log audit details, order, and what action, whether it is succeeded or failed, and current timestamp. Then I am just persisting it to the DV. Next, we'll just define the transaction. Make sure it should import from the correct statement. It should be from the transaction spring framework. Okay. Now in this transactional, what propagation I should mention? I should mention propagation required, right? Is this correct? No. If I'll define propagation required, then it will use the existing transaction what I am using in place and order. If anything goes wrong, it won't persist anything to this audit log. But that is what I don't want. I want irrespective of succeed or failed, I want this must need to be execute. So I can go for required new. Fine. Now let me call this log audit details in this order processing service. First let me inject that handler class private final. Now just call this audit log handler here. Audit log handler dot log audit details and pass the order object. What it need? Order and action, right? So we don't know whether it is succeed or failed. For that, what we can do? We can keep them in a try catch. If catch, then the action will be fail. If it will execute in the try, the action will be succeeded. So what I'll do, I'll just do one thing, then catch, saying that order placement. Now copy this. If there is no error, just keep this. Fine. Now keep this outside. I want irrespective of succeed or failure, this audit log handler must need to audit the order details log so that I can grow my business. If there is a failure, I can keep remind to the user saying that hey, you tried for this order, but the placement was failed. Would you like to retry it? Now just remove this. We don't need. So let's run it. Then we'll validate. Let's clear the console first. Then let's try the happy scenario. Then we'll try the failure scenario. Just go here, and what is the last order we have in our DV? 104, right? So change the ID to 105, product ID 3, and quantity 2. That is the happy scenario, right? 3 means what is the product? If you'll see here, the product 3 is watch, I guess. Yeah, watch. Price is 1500. We won't get any error. Current count is 46. Let's run it and we'll validate. Just execute it. This is the result. Now if you'll check in your DV, count is updated to 44 and record inserted. But let's validate the statement we have defined in required new. Always create a new transaction, suspending if any exists transaction. Okay, so just go to the console output and we'll see the statement. Let me zoom this. Just observe here. First, it create a new transaction for place an order. That is my main transaction because we have defined propagation required. Now, it will save the order. It will use the existing transaction. Then it will update inventory. It will use the existing transaction. Now, if you see here, suspending current transaction, creating a new transaction with name audit log handler log audit details, because this is a method where you have defined I need propagation required new. So in that place it is creating a new transaction by suspending existing transaction. Once this log audit details logic will be executed, then it will release the transaction and your old transaction will be executed. Can you see here? You will find that statement as well. Suspending current transaction, open new, exposing JPA transaction, not this one. Transaction commit JPA transaction on entity manager, initiating transaction. See here, resuming suspended transaction after completion of inner transaction. Inner transaction is nothing, your log audit details. After completion of that, it resume the main transaction, which is nothing, place an order. Okay. Now let's see whether it added the entry to the audit log table or not. Refresh. We have the table. Great. We have the record order placement succeeded. Fine. Now make sure you need to align to this definition what we discussed in the beginning and whether we are able to get the same result in console output or not. Okay, that will give you the concrete picture about the propagation, whether really it is working or it's just a theory. That's fine. I don't want to go in deeper to the log statement. Just clear everything. Now let's see the failure scenario. Now what we are expecting, since we have defined the required new and we understand from the console log, it is creating a new transaction. So if there is any failure while updating the inventory or persisting the order, irrespective of that result, my transaction should execute. It should keep the audit log for me. Now let's try the failed scenario, then we'll validate that. 106 product ID 1. If I'll purchase laptop, I should get the error. Quantity, let it be 1. Anyway, the record will not going to persist. Click on execute. We got the error. First validate in the DV. Great. We got the order placement failed audit log. But if you'll check in the order, the count is same. There is no change. Okay. Which one is our, not this one our order, right? The new record is not inserted. Now if you'll check the product, the count is still 8. There is no update. So we got the audit log result because we have defined required new. So it will must be execute. Now if you'll see the statement, log statement here, it create a new transaction on place an order because you have defined propagation required. Then it will use the existing transaction, suspending current transaction and create a new transaction for audit log. Okay. Then resuming the suspended transaction. Okay. Resuming suspended transaction after completion of inner transaction. then you will find something rollback. Yeah, transaction silently rollback because it has been marked as rollback only. Okay, because we got the error. Fine, let's clear everything. We are good here. So we understand required and required new. These are the two propagation widely used in industry, and there are few more also people using in industry. Let's understand everything. Okay, just go to the propagation. We are done with required and required new. Now let's move to the next one, that is mandatory. Okay, so first let's understand when I will define propagation as a mandatory, what will be the behavior of my transaction. Okay, so when you will define mandatory, what it does, it require an existing transaction. If nothing found, it will throw exception. Okay, so it's simple, right? So what it says, if the method is called within an existing transaction, it will participate in that active transaction. If the method is called outside of an active transaction, it will simply throw an exception saying that illegal transaction state exception. Okay, now let's think about a use case. Here you have persist the order and you have update the inventory. Now also what I want to implement here, I want to validate the payment. Okay, I want to validate the payment. If the payment fail, we still want to track the payment failure in a separate log, but I don't want to roll back the entire order creation and inventory update mechanism. Okay, so what I want, let the flow execute as it is. Additionally, I want to validate just a dummy piece of code. I'm just giving you the use case. So let the place and order flow execute as it is. Additionally, I just want to validate payment. Let it be. I just want to validate the payment, and I want to use the existing transaction. I don't want to create any transaction for it. Rather, this validate payment, I want to use the existing transaction which is running by or initiated by place and order. This is what my use case to demonstrate propagation label mandatory. Mandatory means I need my method to execute within any existing active transaction. If I won't find anything, then simply I will cry. Now let's try to demonstrate this code. So let's create another validator or handler class saying that payment validator handler. So here I am not doing anything, guys. Validate payment. Forcefully I am trying to fail the payment status, and I'm just keep a audit log. That's it what I'm doing. Okay, I'm using the same audit log entity again, rather create another entity saying payment audit log. Let's use the same. We just want to understand the use case and behavior of that propagation type. Okay, so this is simple. Now what I can do, I will just inject this in my order processing service. Just use this handler now. Payment validation validator handler dot validate payment, give the order. Good, right? Just go to the validate payment. We'll do one trick part here. What we'll do, before I save it, or okay, before I save it, I'll just throw some exception. Okay, if let's say order dot get total price, let's say it is greater than 100, let it be. Okay, or 1000, always we want to fail and we want to validate it. That's it, 1000. Then I will throw new runtime exception with some message. Okay, also this validate payment, I want to run an existing transaction, so I will just define transactional propagation propagation you can define mandatory. Okay, now what does it mean? This particular method, even though this will fail here, if I'll call them from the order processing service, it will not harm to this particular guy place an order. Okay, even though from place an order we call this validate payment with transaction propagation mandatory, what it will say, hey, you just execute me as part of your code. If there is some failure on my code, I won't impact to you, you just take me with you. That's what he is only requesting if you will define the propagation mandatory. Okay, if any failure in the payment handler class, still your order and update will be save as it is, the flow will not break. But this guy only requesting for to use your transaction. That is what the main goal if you are using propagation mandatory. Let's validate it. Okay, now let's restart the app. Let me cross validate, scroll down. I guess we don't need to throw the error because already forcefully we are trying to keep the payment successful status to false to just simulate the failure scenario. Okay, because we just want to keep a log, that's it. So just remove this. Now all good, just restart the app, then just clear this, go to the swagger. What is the last order we have? 105, right? So just change it to 106. 3 quantity, let it be 2. Just execute it. There is a bad request. Okay, so this is wrong. Now execute. Record got inserted. This is happy scenario we have tried. Okay, now if you see here, let's see the statement, this audit log. We just want to validate, since we have defined mandatory, it should not create a new transaction, rather it will request place an order transaction to continue. So if you see here, just check the statement, create new transaction. This is the single statement for place an order, propagation required. Now let's validate, it's suspending the current transaction, create new for audit log, because that is what we have defined, required new. That makes sense. Now scroll down, resuming suspended transaction and continue the other one. Yeah, there is no other transaction, rather it participate in existing transaction. Okay, this is the statement, right? Audit log update, it is using the existing transaction. Just clear it. Now if you go and check in your DV, since there is fail in payment validator, it should not break your flow. We got the entry in order DV. We also value get update in the inventory. That's what the role of mandatory propagation. Now to validate that, if it won't find any existing active transaction, it should cry. What I can do, I'll just go to the order processing service, I'll just comment this, there is no active transaction now. Okay, and also I'll do one thing to keep the things clear, I'll just comment this for now, or let it be. Okay, I'll just comment it. Now what we can do, now is there any active transaction when this method will execute? No, it should throw the error illegal state transaction or something like that. Okay, I didn't remember it, but let's debug it and we'll see the result. Just stop it and start in a debug mode. Just clear everything, send the request. Now let me evaluate this expression. If you see the result, what you are seeing here, method through org.spring framework transaction illegal transaction state exception, no existing transaction found for transaction marked with propagation mandatory. So this sentence is clear, right? Mandatory always need an existing transaction. If not found, it will simply give you this message to you. It's clear, right? Cool. Now what I'll do, I'll just comment this, just stop it. Now let's move to the next propagation. Let it uncomment. Now the next propagation we are going to discuss about the never. Okay. Now first let's understand what do we mean by never propagation. So let me keep a note first, then we'll understand. So if we'll define propagation never, it will ensure that the method will execute without transaction. He never need any transaction. If he found any, he will cry with the exception. Okay. So let me keep a note. The method will run without transaction, then throw an exception if found any. See, the name itself is clear to understand. Never means if you have a method who don't want to be part of the transaction, even though you will keep them in transaction, it should not break your existing flow. Rather it will cry, hey, I don't want to be part of transaction, keep me separate. In that kind of scenario you can go for never. So looks like never, mandatory, and other propagation type looks similar, but the purpose is different. Mandatory, he must need a active transaction. Never, he don't need any active transaction. Okay, just keep the thing simple with this kind of word so that it will be clear for you. Okay, now when you will go for never, that's very interesting. So let's consider a use case. While placing an order, we are updating our order DB and we are updating the inventory. Now what I also want to send order confirmation to the user. I want to send order confirmation either over email or using the mobile, I mean the message. Okay, so this I want to execute, but this I want to execute without any transaction. The reason, let's say I'm executing it with transaction with the same flow. Now save order is failed or update inventory stock is failed. Then in real time what you do? We do implement the retries. I will do retries 3 times. Then 3 times this method will execute, which I don't want. Why should I send notification to the user when I will retry? Hey, your order is failed. Hey, your order is failed. If I will do the 5 time, why he will get the 5 time duplicate message that you are retrying, but end user is keep getting the same messages what you have configured. So to avoid that, what I want this to be completely out of transaction. In that case, you can go for propagation never. Okay, so let's do it right now. Let's try to understand it. So let's create another handler for send order confirmation. Now go to the handler, notification handler. Now here what transaction I want to use? I want to use the transaction propagation never. Okay, I don't want this method to be part of any transaction since I'm just sending notification. I have not written any notification logic, rather I just print the statement. Okay, you can add the logic, it's just a demo, so let it go with the flow. Now this is my send order confirmation method. Now what we'll do, we'll just inject this handler in our order processing service, then we'll see. Now just call the method. So I'll just call here notification handler dot send order confirmation notification, let it be. So I'll give the order. That's it. Okay, now let me run in a debug mode. Just since you understand the theory, now if I'll call this method within an existing transaction, will it work or not? That is what first we are going to test. If it will not work, then we need to keep it outside, because that is what the transaction propagation label says. I never want to be part of any transaction. Let's run in a debug mode and we'll validate. It started. Go to the Swagger and just change the ID 107. Send the request. Now if I'll evaluate this expression, what should I get? Let's see. Can you see the messages? Since we have defined this send order confirmation method as a propagation neighbor, it is saying illegal transaction state exception with the messages existing transaction found for transaction marked with propagation neighbor. So I will not execute with you since you cheated with me. Okay. So then in such kind of scenario, what you will do? You should not keep this. You can call this particular method outside the transaction, something like this. So you can do process order. This method does not have any transaction. You call the place an order who will execute with transaction, but this guy you can keep it here. Okay, now this is not part of the transaction, it should work. So let me comment this. Fine. Now let's move to the next one. The next propagation not supported. Okay, let's understand what this not supported propagation means. Just go to the order processing service. Then let's do one thing. Just keep a note of it. So when you will define propagation not supported, what it will does, it will simply execute the method without transaction, suspending if any active transaction found. Okay, so execute okay, makes sense. So this is simple, right? I don't want to execute in a transaction. If I found any, then I'll simply slap that transaction. That is what this not supported. I will not support any transaction. So don't come in my way. That is what means not supported. Now in what situation you should go for this not supported? So this type of propagation is useful when you want to perform an operation that does not require a transaction, like you just want to perform some read only operation. Okay, or you want to just perform logging or sending notification. For example, let's consider a use case here only. When you place an order, you save the order to DB, we update the inventory. Next to that, since you are my customer who is placing an order, what I will do, I will have some surprise for you. What is that? I will give some future product recommendation to you. Since you are purchasing watch, you might like the new accessories come from the watch category. So I will give some recommendation to you at the end. Okay. So this is what the business strategy, right? When you are searching something on Amazon or any e-commerce platform, you are searching some dress material, let's say t-shirt, then it will suggest you so many t-shirts, and you purchase some brand, then it will suggest, let's say it identify that you are searching with the range 1000, then it will give you all the recommendation which comes under that range. Okay, with different brand. So that is what the strategy, right? When user place an order, don't give him with the response, okay, your order is placed xyz. Give him something to watch and interest to purchase the things again. That is how I can grow my business, isn't it? So let's try implementing that things. Let's provide the recommendation, a product recommendation, which is kind of read operation. I will just fetch the product from the inventory by just applying some filter and all. Okay, so in that case I don't need any transaction. If any transaction comes in my way, I will simply kill them or I will simply suspend them. In such kind of scenario, you can go for transaction propagation not supported. Okay, now let me create a product recommendation handler class. Go to handler package and then I'll just create this product recommendation handler class. So there is no complex logic. If you see the code, I'm just returning few hard coded product as a recommendation, and we have defined the propagation as not supported. So this customer id is useless for now. Let's remove it, we don't need it. Okay, so anything else not required, just update it. Next, just inject this in our service class, then we'll access it. Just quickly do that step. Now just call that recommendation handler dot get recommendation. So what we will observe here, in happy scenario this should execute, in failure scenario also this should execute, because not supported will say I will execute, I don't need any transaction, I will execute. If some transaction I will see, I will simply suspend that. That is what this guy is saying. Okay, so how we can validate that? By just seeing the log. So what we can do, all good, let's see. Yeah, all looks good. Just restart the app. So it started. Just clear the console. Now go to the Swagger and change the id to 8. Just execute. This is the happy scenario. The result is update. Now just check the console log. Can you see here? Recommendation fetched for customer. And if you see the complete transaction log, see here. Before it execute recommendation fetched for customer, okay, it found there is a active transaction which is nothing your place and order. So it suspend that current transaction. Then once it execute the what is that, the recommendation engine logic, then immediately it resume the transaction again. Okay, that is what not supported means, right? I will execute, but if I found anything, I will simply suspend it. Once I will complete, you can continue, I don't have any issue. That is what not supported. Now let's run in a failure scenario and we'll validate. So just go here and change the id to 109, product id 1, which is laptop. Just execute. There is a failure, but let's see whether we got the result or not. Can you see here? I don't care whether there is a transaction or not. I will execute my stop. If I found anything, I will simply kill that. Let's see whether that is happening or not. Yeah, suspending correct transaction. Then it execute the recommendation engine logic. Then it resume the suspend transaction. Let you work now. I don't have any issue. That is what the meaning of not supported. So we are good. Now let's move to the next propagation label, that is supports. Okay, now let me keep a note of it. If from the beginning I will give all the definition, it might be confusing. Since we are going one by one definition, then we are doing the POC to prove that concept, that in that way we can understand the complete context of each and every propagation. I hope we all are in the same pace. Okay, so now let's keep a note of supports. So when we'll define the propagation as a supports, what it does, it supports if there is any active transaction. If not, he will execute without transaction as well. Okay, what supports means, I will support transaction if you are giving me, well and good, I don't have any issue. If you are not giving it to me, then also I'm fine, I can execute without transaction. So again I repeat, supports, not support, never, mandatory. This definition might be little bit similar, not exactly similar, but when you will try to understand the definition with the use case, you'll get the clear picture. Okay, not supported, simply deny, I don't need any transaction, I will kill them. Once I will execute my things, then you can continue yours. Supports, what it is saying, I am fine with either or. Give me a transaction, I will execute with it. Don't give me, I'm happy with that as well. Okay. So now think about the use case where you can go for supports propagation label. Now you can consider a simple example. While place an order, you might need the customer details, the customer delivery details, address details to dispatch the product. Okay, that is simple. The gate call, that is fine. If you will keep them in a transaction, it will execute with that. If not, also there is no issue. Okay, or you can also consider the last use case what we have to understand, this get recommendation. Okay, but since we are trying to understand the new one, let's go with the new use case. So I'll not create any handler class now. To keep it simple, I'll just define a method public void get customer. Now I'll just, okay, let it be string, or I'll just print it, no complex logic, customer details fetched. Now I want to keep this transactional annotation with propagation. What is that? We want to keep the propagation as a supports. Okay. So I'm not doing any complex logic, rather I'm just printing the statement. So we already commented this. Good. I'll just call this method get customer details. Now what is our expectation here? This guy should execute with and without transaction. Okay. So let's run it and we'll validate. Again, this is the happy scenario, just change it to 110, execute. Why there is error? Okay, we tried with the failure scenario, right? Let's see. This guy executed, right? So that is what not we want to validate. Let's change it to execute. We got the result. So you can see here. Now if you see here the statement, it should participate in an existing transaction. Can you see here? Now if I will comment this piece of code, this main transaction, and if you will execute also, this will be work fine. So do you want to validate? Let's restart the app and go to the Swagger, change the ID, execute. We got the result. Now if we'll check the console output, customer details fetched. This worked without any transaction. After close the transaction, see here, we close the transaction, still it is working like a normal method. Fine. So we are clear about the supports. Now the last one we have, that is nested. Nested, again to use this nested, it depends your DV configuration. JPA directly don't support this nested. I'll show you. I'll show you the error what we are getting with the nested. First, let's understand what is this nested propagation type. Okay. So just go here and keep a note of it. So when we will define the propagation as a nested, what it will does, it will execute within a nested transaction. Then it will, what it will do, it will allowing nested transaction to roll back if there is any exception or error, okay, without impacting, what is that, without impacting what you can say outer transaction. Let's break it down to roll back. Let it break from here, okay. So nested means you can understand, right? It will execute within a nested transaction so that if anything goes wrong in that nested transaction code, it should not roll back the outer transaction. For example, let's consider something from here, okay. Place an order. This is my outer transaction, right? Let me add a note. This is my outer transaction. So here what I'm doing, I'm just the main DV operation, save order and update inventory stock. Now this get customer details is also there. Let me comment it. Let's say I'll just use this payment validation handler, validate payment. I'll change it to nested, okay, and I'll throw some exception here. So what is that? Okay, let me add this, okay. Keep it nested now. Now what do we mean by this nested? It means this is the nested means you can consider child transaction, okay. Now since this is the child transaction, if anything goes wrong on this validate payment, I don't want this order processing place an order to roll back. There will be any impact on save order or update inventory. I don't want that. But I want to run it in a nested transaction. Nested means nothing. This is the outer transaction. Inside that another transaction. Okay. Now if I'll call this method payment validator handler dot validate payment, if I'll debug this for you, let's stop it. Let's restart the app. It started. Just go to the Swagger and trigger the request, change the ID. You can go for happy scenario, that's fine. Anyway, we won't get any result. I'll tell you why. Now if I'll execute this, can you see the error method? ORG transaction, nested transaction not supported exception. JPA dialect does not support save points. Check your JPA provider's capability. Since we are using Spring Data JPA, I can't show you the use case what we discuss using this nested propagation because JPA dialect is not supporting it. Okay, so you can try with the plain JDBC to understand this nested flow. But what we understand about the nested propagation, I want to execute some logic in nested transaction propagation, but if there is any failure on my nested code, I don't want it to block my outer transaction, or I don't want it to block my actual business flow. In that case, you can go for nested. Okay, this is clear for you, I believe. So we have covered all the different type of propagation, not only theory, we also understand different type of propagation with different valid use case, and we prove each and every propagation with concept log. Okay, hope that is clear for you. Not only theory, we did the postmortem of each and every propagation type in action. Honestly, in real time, we do use required, new, and mandatory, and others I have not seen so far. But again, it depends on the use case, what type of use case you are implementing. Based on that, you need to choose the propagation type. I hope now you are in a state to select the propagation if you will find some use case. So try with different approach and do let me know in a comment if you have any doubt. That's all about this particular video, guys. Thanks for watching this video. Meet you soon with a new concept.